All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our weekly PWA community meeting. So we've got a action-packed agenda as usual. So we're going to start things off with Jordan, who's going to walk us through a white label PWA example over Experience, and then we're going to switch gears to some of the UI components work. And so Jimmy and the rest of the team are really going to be focused on a lot of that after the 2.3.1 release. And so he's going to walk us through kind of the state of the union on what that is, but really what's come next and some of the work that's already in progress around that. And then last but not least, I think more timely is the 2.3.1 release. And so I think a lot of you have seen the dates and kind of the plans on that one, but really want to have a conversation on what that means for PWA and of course answer any questions that you have along the way. And so with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Jordan, you've got the floor here. Why don't you walk us through kind of what your solution is and kind of go through the example here. We're pretty excited to see it.
Yeah, sure. Let me see how I can share my screen. Let me check. Are you guys able to see something?
Sure are.
All right. So Eric asked me to give a little demo about what we're making with PWA Studio. As probably most of you know, we've took a bit of a different turn on how we set up our project. Basically, instead of creating it from scratch with the Peregrine and PWA Studio components, we decided to do it in a fallback way, just like Magento 2 or Magento 1 in general. So this is just a quick demo of what we achieved so far with restyling and creating our own components and using Venia as a fallback theme. So as you can see, it's still work in progress. Our menu is still blank. But if you worked a lot with Venia, you would probably recognize this drawer. We just restyled it a little bit, and for now it satisfies our needs. But things like the search, it's still the default search, but also we did a little customization to it to restyle it to what we like. We got a banner with a call to action, some featured categories, product sliders that are still the Venia components that are loaded in here. So that's pretty cool. That just works alongside ours. These are custom components for brands, and this is all editable from the merchant's point of view, so from the back end. And again, we got a product slider and a basic image and text block with our footer, and we also got a desktop design, which is basically the same as mobile, but just changed it a little bit. So we got a more general feel to how a desktop website should look like. So here we got to show you the effect of the fallback studio. If I go to this product page, you see we still got the Venia product page, but with our header and footer. So yeah, that's basically how we're building our PWA, and the idea is that in time we've extended and overridden everything, and then it's a standalone. So yeah, that's about what we got so far.
Very cool. How does the fallback work, like kind of at a high level?
So basically, I've changed a lot inside Webpack. If you're interested in how it works, you should probably want to go to this repo I made for everybody to use if they want, and there's some motivation, and you can basically read how the fallback works. But it's just like in Magento 1 and 2, you either copy the default Venia component to your sites folder, or just a part of the component. So you could also just copy the let's say button.js, but keep the default CSS from Venia, and then you don't need to copy that.
May
Okay,
I ask
cool.
you, may I ask you a question? Hi, by the way. This looks great.
Hi, thanks.
May I ask you a question? Since the fallback concept involves a directory which appears to contain only a few files to the file system, but once it is resolved through your resolution mechanism, is populated with all of Venia plus your additions. I'm correct so far, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does your editor handle this? Now, with our code editors, often they will spontaneously read the file system as you write, for instance, an import declaration or a require, and will attempt to autocomplete with what modules appear to be available in the resolution space. Did you
Yeah,
customize
sure.
your editor's resolution path, or does it just not work the same?
Let me see if I can share my editor real quick. So,
That would be great to see.
there. Let's see. So I'm using PHP Storm. So basically, if you guys can see it right now, my editor.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the PWA white label repo, where I've got a source folder with an Experience vendor folder and a PWA Studio, which is basically the full PWA Studio repo.
Mm-hmm.
Then I've created our Experience folder with our PWA team or any other customer that we're creating. And then inside source components, you see a lot of components have already been overwritten. For example, the online indicator, search bar, etc. But we're still missing a lot of components compared to the Venia concept. So just to show the difference. Well, you guys probably seen the difference already because there are a lot more components inside Venia than inside our team. And to get back on your question, where is the Experience team? We've got this is our customized Webpack. So in the top, I'm creating a parent team cons, which just resolves to the Venia concept folder. And in our resolver, I've created some aliases, which I can use in my imports. For example, just not sure in which one we're using it. No, these are all from. Let me check. Well, let's say we're using the default button styling from inside Venia. I'm just gonna do, and then it's. Let me check. What was it? So I'm taking this alias, put it in there, and then it resolves back to the default button CSS, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. So it's like the same way we're using the source path as sort of a magic.
Yeah, I figured that out later that if you just put source in there, it also works. So this is more of a way to tell the developer that it is being resolved from the parent team instead of not knowing where it's being resolved from.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense.
But then again, I'm not a Webpack expert, just started to work with it like a few months ago. So
Sure. The great thing about Webpack configuration is that because it's a live JavaScript file, you can do dynamic logic inside it. So if you had or wanted to have a plugin which implements this functionality, then you could start by just doing the dynamic experimentation in your Webpack config itself. And then once you have it right, then you could write a plugin which implements a hook right at the beginning of the process and then just rewrites the configurations resolve.
Yeah.
And that would be a great contribution to the ecosystem. Candidly, I don't think all of us want to encourage a fallback resolution mechanism. We would rather do some sort of module composition concept and make sure that we design Venia and other components so that that module concept is clear, as well as maybe doing some documentation and some webinars on it. but this is also really productive and really cool. So we want it to be an option for people that's published and that is easy to integrate into their system.
Yeah. Yeah, so the main reason why we did it this way is because we just wanted to get started with building a PWA.
Sure.
And for us, because we've worked with only the default Magento stack, the technical depth just felt too much to start from an empty folder. I'm also not a seasoned React developer. So just like you wouldn't create Magento from an empty folder, but rather extend on Luma,
right.
We just thought like, hey, this is an easy way to get into creating your own stuff and just really, making it easier for the rest of the developers to just get started.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, this is great, Jordan. I mean, I think for those who aren't familiar with Jordan's work, he's often the first, really the responder when it comes to a lot of the messages that come up in Slack. And I think when you look at the solution, similar to what Luz has provided, it really answers that question. How do I get started, right? I mean, we've got a product that's been out there for quite some time, but once people are up and running with Venia, that next question is going to be, well, great. How do I use this for my purposes? And I think everybody who looks at the roadmap and where we're going understands the pieces that will be available in time. But I think what makes this really interesting is that it's a bridge in that direction, and at least as a means to start off with, at least where the current state of work is. And so for that, I mean, it's I think it's well done. I think experiential. I think you guys have spent a lot of time and detail on how this looks for your white label and kind of what you're doing around that work experience. But so far, I think it's really nice. We appreciate you sharing this and taking questions on this.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Are there any other questions or suggestions?
I did have one more question. That is,
sure.
What's like the biggest thing that that PWA could do to make this approach that you're using easier? Like what was a big roadblock you guys hit that you wish we had done something differently?
That's a good question.
So I think that it's a really small point, but as you said before, the source instead of the hard-coded pad. There's still some Venia components that write it like this, like .banner.css.
It's mixed.
And it might be better to write it source and then whatever. So it always resolves. So I don't need to copy or create a fallback to the file that we're extending. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
But then again, I know this is not the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nothing. I was just gonna get some context. We tried to use source as much as possible, but when you start having long paths, people start shortcutting.
Yeah, makes sense. But then again, I know this is not the recommended way to go, so I'm not sure if you would want to encourage people to do it this way. And I think if you're gonna make it easier for people to set up their team like this, you really need to embrace it and say this is gonna be our way to go instead of going half at it.
Yeah. That's that's a pretty simple find and replace kind of operation across the repo. So that's definitely something we could pretty easily consider. I don't know if we could say we'll do that right now, but like we could easily consider doing that actually.
Totally.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Cool.
All
right. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you. So I think probably a perfect segue, Jimmy. Maybe kind of walk us through some of the plans for the future. I think that's probably a good segue. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's right on topic for what we're talking about doing here. So I will share screen. So I've been working on a bit of documentation here. I'm going to throw this up into the wiki once I'm done kind of fleshing it out here. But I wanted to do some writing on the general direction of PWA Studio in 2019. Can you guys see my screen?
Sure can.
Okay, cool. But basically, the gist of it is I want to talk about what James was just talking about, how we've got these methods of customization out there, that people are familiar with, right? Configuration, extension, and modification. And that Magento, has typically relied a lot on this extension mechanism. But what we've built and what the front end web in general is using right now favors composition because it doesn't have a static tree to extend. So we kind of need to explain how that works, why you would go with composition. But at the same time, that can't be the only answer. So what we're working on right now, right? We've been working on Venia, which is kind of this example theme. We proved out a lot of concepts, which I've got listed up here. Things we figured out while we were making Venia. But ultimately, what we're trying to build as our first kind of product is a set of components, right, which we were calling Peregrine, that would be useful for you to individually import and then construct a whole site like Legos, like building blocks. But like Jordan was just saying, for some people that's going to be too overwhelming, right? They're either not going to have the expertise on the team or they're not going to have the time or whatever else. And so we do eventually need to build a theme. But the question is, how do you accomplish that? And so ultimately that's going to start with just taking these building blocks we build for Peregrine and building something like Venia that can then be changed primarily through configuration. But we'll also need to figure out what does extension actually mean with a fully dynamic tree like you have in React. Do you do fallback like Jordan has done with Experience there? Or do we do something more akin to like a directory model where all components are imported from some standard directory? So there's a few ideas here and we're gonna have to prove these out, but the very first step is to start actually building these Peregrine components so that you have a really useful library of individual pieces to build from. So we're gonna start doing that, and then I have another document to write here on what those components look like, but we can take a peek. And they're going to be you're going to start seeing a bit of a different style come to components in Peregrine and then used in Venia. That is going to be these React hooks based components. These are function components rather than classes, and they work a little bit differently, but it's really going to clean up a lot of the code. It's going to make these things a lot more unit testable. It's going to make them a lot more configurable. You're going to start seeing components that are essentially a function here of props and that set up their handlers using what's called hooks. Things like use callback, right, which will set up a memoized callback for a click handler. You'll see some callbacks like use effect to do side effects. You'll see pop over to navigation. You see that we can store local state inside components, all without any of the class methods. And this is going to allow us to create much more reusable components inside of Peregrine. Inside of Peregrine, you're also not going to see all of the styles that you get with Venia, so you'll be able to get much more of that blank theme experience with them. And this will reduce our reliance on Redux so that not every component needs to fit into the same exact Redux schema like they do in Venia, where all of the global state is sort of interacted with throughout the entire application. We'll be able to have segments of the app like the navigation tree that have their own state that all of their children can interact with. So we're going to see some documentation coming on this, and then pretty quickly here in the next couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing PRs go up with components for these, and these are going to be, I think, a lot more useful. And the other thing we can do is we're going to be able to have components that essentially return themselves as hooks. So I'll try to explain what that means. If we have a component and we say, okay, my component here is a function of props, right? Normally we would have something like, I'm going to return a div, right? It's going to have a header inside of it, and so on. This whole structure ends up being very opinionated. And if we do a bunch of important work here inside of this function, so we take, props.items and we map it, and then we sort it or something. We have some logic going on in this component, but we also have some opinions being laid down through the structure, some restrictions being placed on what you can do with this component. And so what you're going to start seeing with some of these Peregrine components is that we'll have a function here that applies this logic and basically returns an object of all of the output of all of the work it really does, but not DOM. So it's not a component, right? It's just it's a hook. And then in the component that's also exported from it, you will see something like that. And now this component can use all of the work that was being done to render its DOM, but if you wanted to write your own component based on this, you can just import the hook and write a completely, totally different component that has none of our opinions on structure, none of our opinions on style, and just gets the core logic out of it by calling this hook directly in your component. Basically one function call, and you've got all of the logic. So that's what we're going to have largely available from Peregrine, and that's what we're going to start using to construct this theme that we're talking about. So directions are going to go up on that pretty quickly here, and then we've got some components that we're writing on our end, and we'll hopefully also start getting some people from the community involved, because this is a really exciting time for React, because this opens up all kinds of new possibilities and solves a lot of existing problems. So look forward to that documentation coming soon, and some of those components. Eric, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Any questions on that? I think for those who are familiar with hooks and we're starting to ask some of those questions on what's next, I think that should really give folks a taste of what's to come. But I want to take just a minute to see if there are any questions. We may have a few here in chat while I get to that. So any questions or comments? Oh, we got a couple here from Andreas here. There's some PHP Storm questions. The gist URL, yeah, so they're asking about that. So I think, Jimmy, you're planning on posting that to the GitHub wiki point.
Yeah, that's just a work in progress. I need to flesh out the examples, but that'll be up on the wiki probably today.
Cool. Yeah. Yep, and James looks like he's addressing that as well. Sorry, just catching up to the thread as we're listening. So any other questions on this one? This is pretty big, right? I mean, and again, I think we deliberately chose to go with Venya the way that we did, for us to learn how to make these components and for us to really take advantage of things like hooks and really what is going to be the way of doing things, the way of PWA on things. And so we're pretty excited about this, and we'll go through here in just a second some of the early work that's being done on navigation and such to start to break these things down based on where we left off with Venia. But it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, right? We're not talking about tearing up
Nope.
what we have with Venia, right? We're talking about we have a job here to translate these components into Peregrine, so that they're useful without all of the Venia specific styles. And so in that process, right, we're going to be updating things to use hooks where we can.
Yep. Cool. All right, thanks, Jimmy. So let's switch gears then to 231. So I think it's been a hot topic in social media and certainly around inside the company the last week or so. And so for those who aren't familiar, 231 is really going to be our next release. And for those who haven't seen, that is slated for March 26th. And so we're pretty excited about that here internally. For those who've been following the latest work in GitHub, you'll actually see our preparations for that. And so for us, our goal is to be compatible with that. And ultimately, for us, we made that conscious decision, with some of the GraphQL that was available with 2.3.0, now to start consuming and thinking about what 2.3.1 means to us. And so I want to give folks at least a sample of what things look like on the current ZenHub board on the types of things we're hoping to unlock. And we've got folks like Steven and others reaching out to various members of the teams on things that we were like, what, we've got this groomed, we've got this built. When can we get this done? And so we're finally at a point now to start consuming a lot of the work in a very Venia way, but then that then sets the stage for how we start to look at these in terms of components as well. But yeah, 2.3.1 for us is really about compatibility. There's a lot of great work on GraphQL that's been done, much of which was done by the community, and really is just going to help us consume more of that and less of the REST fallback that we've used to date, which has allowed folks to early adopt. But ultimately, we're looking at additional GraphQL coverage that does hit items around my account. It does give us some partial cart coverage in terms of creating those empty carts. Catalog and of course framework. The big one for a lot of us is introspection on the production level for that, which is great. And so for those who've been waiting for that and have had to rely upon development mode for introspection, that'll be available as early as next week. And again, if you're already using the developer builds, you'll start to see that right away. So any questions about 2.3.1? Any concerns? Anything like that? Because I do want to show a little bit of what our board's going to look like beyond that. All right. Let me share the screen here. All right. So this is our ZenHub board, and so for those who are following along, we've made a lot of great progress. And again, kudos to the team here, to the team remote, and of course the community for helping us get there. There's a lot of work that's out there to date, and you'll start to see a lot of this, closed, one after another, and making its way into to PRs that are both reviewed and merged. Now part of developed, but also then been tagged with what we're calling our 2.1 branch. I know that can be a little bit confusing between 2.1 and how that relates to 2.3.1, but we have a pretty development centric audience here, so you'll appreciate the needs for Semver on that. Ultimately, though, you'll start to see some new work, and so we had a team meeting yesterday afternoon to start thinking about what those items might be to start releasing that were once on hold. Some of which have been on hold for a month or two, but based on some great work from the Bar Green team, from Adrian, from others, some of which here on the call, to start unlocking some of these features, specifically around things like sorting and filtering. So we've got this idea around sorting and category within Venia. We've been waiting for the GraphQL coverage for that for some time. So that some of these are going to be ready to start. So that's great news. And then we've also got some work here around the like toasts, and then potentially also some work here around account as well. And so be looking for that and be looking for some progress after next week. We do need to review and continue to merge some of this work. Ultimately, our goal is to make continued progress on Venia as we have it, but also in parallel, really double down on these UI components that Jimmy has talked about for that. But you'll start to see more of that, and most of which were kind of held back by our GraphQL coverage and making that conscious decision. Let's wait for that to come by way for us to then quickly adapt and consume some of these things that have already been, kind of roughed out and in some cases fully built for us to review and merge that. So we're pretty excited about that. The other parts you'll start to see are these Peregrine components. So Jimmy gave you a sneak peek on what those look like. You'll see that we're actually in progress for that navigation one. So you'll start to see more and more of that as we begin to translate Venya into Peregrine. So things are going to start moving really, really fast for this. And so while the team, I think, has ultimately been really focused on quality, really focused on performance, and really how we get ready for the cloud and some of the work there, you'll start to see a lot of this flesh out and really a return to the community. And so start looking for things like good first issues. We actually identified one yesterday around updating the account, the order number at the end of order details when you've placed an order, a couple things like that. So be looking for that, and we'll cover more of those in these meetings. Not necessarily in terms of formal grooming, but really in the essence of kind of walking through a couple of these that might be good candidates for folks here to take on and kind of look at possible contribution. We'll also have an active presence in future Magento events, clearly Imagine, but also the Meet Magento series, contribution days, and Mage Titans and other events as well. And so look for us to be pretty active in that to continue to drive some acceleration here, again, with Venya itself, with these UI components, and then of course the studio itself and all the work that's being done there, including Upward as well. So that's just a little bit of a 2.3.1 update as it relates to what our work and our compatibility looks like for that next release of Magento next week, and what it means for us, consuming and thinking about the day-to-day work with the extended GraphQL coverage, which we're pretty excited about. So, any questions on that? There's Crystal. All right.
Clear as crystal.
Very good. James, anything you want to add to that? I did my best to summarize, but I know you've been in the throes of some of this as well. Anything that I missed? Anything you'd like to add on to?
No, not really. I think I was really proud of and happy with the summation of the next steps with extensibility and with the addition of Peregrine and its hooks that Jimmy already showed. I am increasingly going to be pushing experimental concepts into the pull request queue as our team that does core engineering implementation has achieved this kind of amazing velocity, and as the network of community folks who are on this call have come to understand the aims and goals of this project so much. So you'll see me kind of pushing some ideas, having some new concepts to help make this code even more usable and reusable. Among them in my docket are concepts for scaffolding new systems in conjunct with Louis Vonken, who has been so awesome on that point so far. Additional concepts of mapping GraphQL and other types into individual implementations so that we can have the sort of automated module install concept that Jimmy described map directly onto strong and static types, which is something that you're accustomed to in the Magento DI world. And perhaps additions and modifications to Upward so that it can become an even more powerful way to centralize your configuration and your deployment strategy. But all those things are still on the burners for me. I would hesitate to say that they're on the back burners, but I'm going to start contributing things on that order. I would also welcome everyone else too. I think one really cool thing I'd like to toss out is that I'd really love to see somebody implement an Upward server that does React rendering on the back end. As we've discussed before, all of that means is that it implements the Upward specification, that it adds a template engine that it supports. And if you are out there and want to give that a shot, I would be very interested. That may open up a whole set of discussions on how we do server-side rendering of our progressive web app in a way that is useful to first paint into SEO and SMO. So that would be really fun to see. Another thing that would be really cool to see coming out of our community, though we're also going to be working on it, you could just beat us to the punch, is it would be great if some folks took a look at the new innovations and additions to Google's Workbox library, because we have talked a lot about having a much better development story and customization story for your service worker. That is a key aspect of what differentiates us from other progressive web apps that just have some extra caching, which is that as an e-commerce application, we have the ability to encode some business-based concepts and logic about how to do caching directly into the service worker caching mechanism. And that would require doing some stuff with Workbox and then maybe integrating Workbox's build of a service worker into our Webpack build. We have some experiments for doing that, but Workbox 4 actually supports that functionality natively. So working that into the code base would be really cool. All of those things, like I said, are suggestions or concepts to be appended to our backlog or to start working on separately. But I just want to invite everybody to participate in that process. Thank you so much. And that's all I got.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Yeah, just as a reminder for those who've been following us for quite some time, our original Workbox work was actually contributed by the marketing team, right? They worked very closely with us, and one of many examples were key pieces of that Venia experience, key pieces of the studio were brought forth, just like James had mentioned, and in this case, the new Workbox releases have enabled some new ideas in that area. And so yeah, definitely don't be shy. We love seeing some of the experimentation, some of which we feature here, but also as we build this out together, let's get the real product. Let's look at the the storefront and the components and how we make this easier to build, optimize, and deploy. So with that, thank you so much for all your time. It looks like we had a really good audience today. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, you know where to find us on Slack, Twitter, what have you, and have a great rest of your Friday, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.